Welcome to the Conoy Church podcast. We're glad that you're interested in connecting through this teaching time. If you'd like to connect further, feel free to reach out to us through our website, conoychurch.org. For now, enjoy this teaching from Conoy Church, where our mission is to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ.
This morning I want to talk about, well, a couple things. You guys can see your bulletin, so you know what I want to talk about. It's really three things. There's a debate in the church that goes back a really, really long time. It goes all the way back to the Protestant Reformation, which is why I put this little church history lesson back on the board here, just to give us a reminder. We've been through it, many times. For the first kind of 1,000 years of the church was one church. We've talked about that, and then around 1054. There was this split between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. And we had two churches. And then about 500 years later, we had the Protestant Church, which broke off from the Catholic Church. And the person that we talk about most of the time when we talk about the Protestant Reformation is a guy named Martin Luther, right? And some followers of Martin Luther took his name and developed a denomination called the Lutherans, okay? But he's not the only person that sort of was a part of the Protestant Reformation. There was another guy whose name was John Calvin, okay? And he's somebody that I haven't really talked much about with you guys before, because it just hasn't really been necessary for us to kind of talk through the church history thing. But today, it makes some sense. So John Calvin broke off just a couple years after Martin Luther did. His break off wasn't as well known. Martin Luther nailed this thing to the door of a church. His story is much more well known. John Calvin, less so. But his teachings informed denominations like the Presbyterians, which I'm sure you've heard of, denominations that go with the name Reformed, and then some independent congregations as well. They follow the teachings of John Calvin. And John Calvin developed some ideas of Christian theology that took on the name Calvinism, okay? John Calvin handpicked, so as he got older and older and was getting close to his death, he had students that he was teaching. And his students had become, very smart. They were theologians in their own right. And he handpicked a student who would be his successor. And that guy's name was Theodore Beza. Theodore Beza was a very smart person, and he took on students. And one of his students' names was Jacob Arminius. Jacob Arminius was a pastor, a theologian. He was a teacher at a college or a university. I don't think they called them colleges then. And Jacob Arminius was being taught Calvinism, and he disagreed with what he was being taught. And he disagreed with it for several reasons, but ultimately he didn't like what it was teaching him about who God was. And so he developed some different ideas about these teachings of Calvinism. And so he started to talk about those things. But Calvinism was sort of the accepted belief in this geographic location where he was at. And so the Calvinists who were in the area said, if you're going to teach this, you need to come present this at this national gathering. And unfortunately, he got ill and died before he could do that. But, and this is all happening around 1611, okay? So we have, this is our timeline here. Jacob Arminius' followers, people that really bought into his teachings, they decided, we will take what he taught, we'll write it down for him, we'll present it for him. And so they did that. And his teaching took on the name of Arminianism. And they presented it for him. Calvinism decided to do a response to that. And so what you end up having is this sort of back and forth 5-point response between these two teachings that go on for centuries, okay? If you spend any time in the church, you probably have heard the debates between Calvinism and Arminianism. And today we're not going to spend a lot of time debating these things, just so you know. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the back and forth between them. I will tell you what they are, just so that you're aware of them, but then we're just going to talk about this top one. Calvinism is easy to remember because the first letter spells tulip, okay? And it has 5 points. So the first one is total depravity. And it's the idea that people are completely sinful. And we're so sinful that we cannot choose God. So God has to choose us. We are predestined by God to choose to choose him. The second one is unconditional election, which means that we are elected to salvation not based on merit. Anything that we do, whether we're good or bad people, that is not why we are elected to salvation. We're simply elected to salvation because God chooses some to be elected to salvation and doesn't choose others. So some people are elected to salvation and some people are elected to hell. Limited atonement means that when Jesus died on the cross, that's what we call atonement. Limited atonement means that the atonement was only good for the people that go to heaven. So it wasn't atonement for everyone. It's limited. Irresistible grace means that when God calls the elect, they cannot resist. So if you are chosen, if you are elected by God, you cannot resist the call. Perseverance of the saints means that you cannot lose your salvation. So if you accept God, or if you are elected and you have salvation, it cannot be lost. Calvin and his teachings were incredibly popular. Presbyterian churches, Reformed churches, independent churches. And another reason they became really popular is because of something called the Scofield Study Bible. Anybody heard of the Scofield Study Bible? Okay. So the Scofield Study Bible was really the first published Bible that came with notes, commentary, references in it, and Calvinistic references and notes were the thing that was in it. Arminian theology then had a really big impact on Anabaptists, so Mennonites, Brethren in Christ, Baptist denominations, the Methodist Church, and the Pentecostal Church, okay? And these two then disagree for a really long time. And some of you guys have been at Conoy or part of the Brethren in Christ long enough that you probably remember some of the very heated debates about these that even go back into the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Probably some church councils where somebody blew up and were shouting back and forth, or the silent car rides home, or the times you got back home and somebody was quite upset because somebody was teaching the wrong thing in Sunday school class, sort of thing. So what's the other side of it, just so that you have the other side of the coin? Arminianism also believes in depravity. So sin has really made us completely sinful. The difference is, though, is that God does something with grace that allows us to choose him, okay? Something called prevenient grace. God does a work of grace in all of humanity that allows humans to choose him. Rather than God just electing us at his whim and based on none of our merit, God regards those to be followers of Christ by the faith that they have in him. Predestination is not who will believe. Predestination talks about the inheritance of the believer. So you're predestined, if you are a follower of Jesus, then you are predestined to eternal life, adoption into the kingdom, and redemption. Instead of limited atonement, they say atonement is for everyone. Jesus' death on the cross was good for all of mankind. All people have the opportunity to have salvation. They would not say that grace is irresistible. They would say that mankind has free will. They have the free will to resist grace. Everyone has the opportunity. You have the free will to say no to Jesus if you want to. And they would not say that once you are in, you're in for good. They would say that your salvation is conditional based upon you being a follower of Jesus. If you decide you don't want to be a follower of Jesus anymore, then you give up your salvation. So if you choose to, follow another religion, you give up your salvation. If you choose to be an atheist, then you're giving up your salvation. If you choose to live a life that is in direct contradiction to the call of Scripture on your life, then you're giving up your salvation. So they would say that it is conditional. But they're not saying you can't be like, oh, whoops, I misplaced my salvation. I don't know what I did with it. It's not like you can just lose it, but you can reject it, is what they're saying. That's the difference between these two things, okay? I think these are probably worth talking about because even today, this is still a sort of debate in our denomination. There are still folks who go back and forth on these two positions, and the brethren in Christ still falls here and not here. And sometimes we end up finding that this is being taught places, and that becomes problematic because our theology lands over here. So it probably is something that's worth talking about. But the thing that I want to talk about this morning is not those two things. I brought that up because I want to talk about this idea of total depravity. It's sort of a weighty concept. It's not something that people are unfamiliar with. Here's the point. Why do we talk about how depraved people are? Why do we talk about how sin has pervaded people so much? The point of both of these is so that we understand how important grace is. That's the point, okay? Whether you believe in total depravity with grace that's attached to it so you can choose God, or you believe in total depravity where God has to choose you, it does not matter. The point is we need the grace of God in both situations. The point for us is to see that sin is such a problem in our lives and in this world that we need the wonderful grace of God, that we are saved by that grace, and that we should be thankful for that grace. Ephesians 2:8 says, and I'm going to say this verse several times this morning. I hope that it is like burned into your brain. For it is grace, it is by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. So let us be thankful for that grace. Let's sing songs about that grace. Let's praise God for that grace. We just did that, right? We just sang grace like rain. We sang songs about that grace. Let us be thankful for that grace. But one of the many ways that church has often tried to drive into us since the time we were children, the need for grace, is by focusing on this totally depraved part, the part where sin has completely corrupted us, and there's no uncorrupted part left. And I don't want to oversimplify this, but it leaves people feeling a variety of ways. So I'm not trying to oversimplify it with this drawing, but I drew a pendulum here, okay? Again, the point is grace, the wonderful gift of grace. But the pendulum often swings to where grace means I have no responsibility. Or I need grace means I'm worthless. Okay? We have people that are firmly in both of these camps. And sometimes we end up correcting one and the pendulum swings really far the other way. Did you ever notice that in life? How we sometimes try to correct the swing one way and so the pendulum swings really far the other way? When in reality, if we could just get that thing to stop swinging, we'd be so much better off. The point of understanding how pervasive sin is in this world and in our lives is for us to understand how thankful we should be for the grace of God. Some folks live in a way where grace means I have no responsibility. They live in a way without regard for others, under a covering of grace. If they sin by doing something that they know is wrong, like gossip or anger, or causing disunity in the body, they'll say things like, oh, well, grace covers me, right? And I'm sure you've heard that before. Well, I can do that because God will forgive me, right? Have you ever heard somebody say something like that? Maybe not exactly like that. Maybe they don't even say it out loud, but they live in such a way that it sure seems like they're willing to do and say whatever they want because it seems like they believe, well, I can just ask for forgiveness. I can do whatever I want. Or maybe they weaponize scripture and they claim to be speaking truth in love. And regardless of the pain and the shame and the damage that they're doing to the people around them, they claim, well, grace covers me because I'm speaking God's word. If I'm speaking God's word, then I've got grace to cover me. And so as long as they continue to claim grace, even if they're confronted by a brother or sister in their sin, or the hurt that they've caused, they feel justified because they're covered by grace. But that is grace without responsibility. That is something called cheap grace. Cheap grace is a term coined by someone named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a pastor executed in a Nazi concentration camp. Cheap grace doesn't understand the cost that was paid for grace. Cheap grace lacks repentance. It lacks discipline. It lacks confession. Cheap grace doesn't require this person to go back and ask for forgiveness from those that they hurt. Cheap grace doesn't require this person to repent from the way that they've been living and choose a new way. Cheap grace doesn't require a person to exercise discipline and sometimes choose not to say what they really want to say. The grace that's extended to us requires responsibility from us. In Matthew 18, Peter asks Jesus, how many times should I forgive someone who sins against me? It's a good question. In essence, the question he's asking is, as a follower of God, as a follower of Jesus, how much grace should I extend to others, especially those who might hurt me? And what Jesus does is he responds by telling him a story about a king who had a whole lot of people who owed him money. But one person in particular owed him so much money that there would be no way that he could pay it back even in multiple lifetimes. The Bible records the amount of money to be more money than even a king should really have, okay? The Bible is making this out to be a staggering amount of money, okay? And that's how much money this person owes the king. So the king calls this person into his court, and he says, pay me back the money. And the man says, I don't have it. So the king says, well, then you, your wife, your children, all your possessions to be sold in order to pay the debt. And the man starts to beg and plead, please don't, please don't, please don't. Just be patient with me. Give me time. I'll pay it back, which is absurd. Even in multiple lifetimes, he could never pay this back. But he says, just be patient with me. I'll pay it back. And the king takes pity on him. The king doesn't just be patient with him. The king wipes away his debt and sends him on his way. What grace, what incredible grace, what incredible gift he has been given. He has been set free, debt free. And so the man walks out of the palace. And no sooner does he walk out of the palace does he come face to face with one of his friends who owes him a small amount of money. And he demands on the spot, pay me back what you owe me. And his friend doesn't have the money. And his friend says, just be patient with me. I'll pay it back. And he says, no. And he has guards throw his friend in prison until the debt can be repaid. People are around watching this whole thing happen, knowing what the king just did for him. And so they go right to the king and they say, you won't believe what that guy just did. And they tell the king the whole story. The king calls the man back into the court and he says, did you forget what I just did for you? Did you forget all of the grace that I just gave? You begged me. You begged me to give you that grace. The least you could have done was give grace to your fellow. But you couldn't do that, could you? And the king says, because of your wickedness, I will hand you over to the jailer to be tortured until your debt will be repaid. Grace comes with responsibility. Cheap grace has no responsibility. Grace comes with responsibility. How much grace should a follower of Jesus extend to someone, even someone who may sin against them? As much grace as has been given to the follower of Jesus. That is what Jesus is trying to tell Peter. You should give as much grace as has been given to you. That is a lot of responsibility. That is not cheap. We should find ourselves so thankful for the grace that has been given to us that we cannot help but extend such grace to others as a way to share the good news that was shared with us. Do we forget all the ways the good news has been shared with us? The good news has been shared with you so many ways. And this grace is one way the good news has been shared with you, and it is one way that you can share it with those around you. Grace comes with responsibility. There are those who live in this world and feel, though, that because they need grace, it means they are worthless. They've been beaten down by being told that there is nothing good in them, forgetting that they were fearfully and wonderfully made, as Psalms 139 tells us. Forgetting that when God made mankind, in Genesis 1, he made mankind in his own image. Forgetting that God breathed his own spirit into mankind in Genesis 2. Forgetting those things, they feel worthless. Some of them have even taken it upon themselves that they will try to be perfect so that they are not so worthless. They will pursue perfection by their own power. much like the rich young ruler in Matthew chapter 19. They'll keep every single command. They'll keep every single rule, thinking that it will somehow, in some way, make them right with God if they can just do that. They might even be proud of how good they have been, just like the rich young ruler was. But still, despite following all those things and trying so hard to keep those rules, there's something just missing. For even after keeping the whole law, the rich young ruler asked Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus didn't say to him, "Well, just keep on keeping on those rules, buddy. You're on the right track." Jesus didn't say that. He said, "Go and sell everything you have. Give all your possessions to the poor, and then come follow me. That's how you'll have treasure in heaven." And the rich young ruler walked away sad because his heart was owned more by the possessions than his heart was owned by the God that he thought he followed. Something was still missing. It's another version of cheap grace, my friends. We can trick ourselves. That's the thing. The longer that we are in the church and a part of the church, we are able to fall prey to this other version of cheap grace. And here it is. You can be here for so long that you can get so good at memorizing all the rules and regulations to be a Christian that you forget what it means to follow Jesus. You can forget to open this. You can forget to read about the life of Jesus. You can forget who Jesus was around, who he talked to, who he loved, who he cared about. You can forget why he came. You can forget the words that he said because you have found yourself checking off the box of what it means to be a Christian instead of a Jesus follower. And that is cheap grace. Some of us have become more familiar with Christianity and less familiar with Jesus. That's cheap. That's cheap. We're missing it. Missing the forest for the trees, my friends. See, trying to be perfect as a way to prove that we're worth it, it's worthless. Because we aren't saved by being perfect. For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves, it is a gift of God. Not by works, so that no one can boast. It isn't what you bring to the table. It's what God brings to the table. It's not what you bring to the table because God doesn't want you comparing yourself to anybody else and anybody comparing themselves to you. It's not about what you bring to the table. It's about what God brings to the table. It is a gift. All you have to do is have faith in it, believe in it. God, I want the gift of grace that you're offering me. I'm in. I want to walk with you. I want to follow you. God, I want the gift of grace that you're offering. That's it. That's all you have to say. That is where the journey starts. God, I want that gift of grace. I want to follow you. I'm in. But Nick, what about that sin thing? What if I mess it up? You remember that sin thing, Nick? Isn't that just all up in me? What if I mess that up? Of course I remember that. That's a part of this whole story. I mean, that's why we have this. This so encouraging that we have this. That's why grace isn't cheap. That's why your faith is ongoing. It's a relationship, not a transaction. This isn't a grocery store, my friends. Grace isn't something that you went to the grocery store, picked up off the shelf, went to the self-checkout line, and then you left the store and you're done. Grace is an ongoing relationship. It's like a marriage or the tightest friendship that you've ever known. You've got to keep working at this thing and caring for it and asking for help and learning and being unselfish and repenting when you mess up. There's a Hebrew word I want to teach you this morning. The word's teshuvah. Say it with me. Teshuvah. Okay. This is the Hebrew word that we translate as repent. And usually the word repent makes us think of things like being sorry or regretful. But really what it means here is return. Joel 2:12 says, "Even now, declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart." Teshuvah. Return to me with all your heart. Psalm 51 is the psalm where David is writing down all of his feelings after his transgression, where he assaulted and committed adultery with Bathsheba, after he killed Bathsheba's husband, and he writes down all of his feelings. Jewish scholars call Psalm 51 David's teshuvah, his return. Teshuvah describes the choosing of a new path, which is what repentance is. This is the answer to the question, what do I do if I mess up? Teshuvah. I choose a new path. I return to God. I was on the path with God. I got off of it. Now I get back on the path with God and I leave the path I was on for good. I return to the Lord with all of my heart, like Joel says, right? All of my heart, teshuvah. So when Jesus has a woman caught in adultery and she's surrounded by men with rocks, and Jesus clears the crowd, and everyone drops their rocks and they walk away. And Jesus says to the woman, "Woman, where are your accusers?" And he helps her up and she says, "They're gone." And he says, "Then neither do I accuse you. Go and sin no more." That's teshuvah. Jesus cleared a way for her to get back on the right path. He's made a way for her. Her accusers are gone. All she has to do is walk forward onto the new path. When the lame man asks Jesus to heal him, and Jesus tells him to take up his mat and walk, and he does. Jesus says, "Your faith has healed you. Go and sin no more." That's teshuvah. Jesus cleared a way for him to get back on the path. He's made a way for him. The thing that pushed this man to the outsides, the margins of society, that thing is no more. All he has to do is walk forward onto the new path. Literally walk forward onto the new path. Teshuvah, repentance, getting back on the right path is what you and I need to do when we mess up. But it's also the thing that Jesus is doing in each of our lives to make a way for us to follow him. Jesus makes a way. Jesus makes a way. Jesus makes a way. Not your pursuit of perfection, not you thinking you're worthless, not you thinking you can say or do whatever you want because you're covered under grace. Not cheap grace, not checkbox Christianity. Jesus makes a way, my friends. Jesus makes a way. You are not saved by anything other than grace. Jesus makes a way. For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves. It is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. Jesus makes a way.
Hi, this is Pastor Nick. Thanks for listening. I hope something that you heard today was very helpful. If you want to connect with us further, feel free to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or our website, conoychurch.org. Sure, I'm glad we're in this together.